En una sonrisa celeste y blanca, si subo la mirada, la luna se levanta. Física dice mi historia, mi fama me llora, mi pena por ganas desaparecido en memoria. Por los guachos carnales, puñetas, purices, chapales, al mundo le tiembla el piso por la euforia. Busco la paz en Bolivia, en la calle de Chile, me busco en invierno el agua ardiente de Colombia. Vengo del barrio del tango y llego al meridiano para borrar con la mano la línea divisoria. Si preguntan quién soy, que llego a donde voy, soy de Tierra Santa, soy de donde nací, donde voy a morir, mi Tierra Santa. Si preguntan quién soy, que llego a donde voy, soy de Tierra Santa, soy de donde nací.
All right. Hola, everyone. So we are wrapping up our Hispanic Heritage Month celebrations, and I am excited to introduce our guest speaker today, a true Chingona that will walk us through her journey, Dr. Claudia Cristina Avila. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Can you see my presentation okay? Okay,
Yes.
great. So thanks so much for having me. I'm so honored to not only be part of this series, but also to be closing out the Vamos Unidos series. I hope that every one of you have had the chance to celebrate, reflect, and really honor Latin Heritage Month. So let's get into this. My name is Claudia Cristina Avila. And today I'm going to be discussing Xingona dirt science. It's really a story of how I've leveraged my identity, my culture, my community as I navigate and use science as a tool for progress. But before we begin, I want to start off with a simple breathing exercise. So many of us are always on the move, on Zoom or on Teams, always running to the next thing. And we really never get a chance to really recenter and focus. So we will be doing a very simple 4x4 breathing exercise or box breathing. And if you like and are able, you can put one hand on your chest and one right below your rib cage, and you really want to breathe with your belly. So I'll be doing a countdown so you can see how we'll be breathing. So okay, hopefully that has been helpful for each of you. So I wanted to, now that we're centered and we're sharing this space together, I wanted to preface this talk, this conversation, by promising each and every one of you that right now I'm going to be my most authentic self. So in this space, I'm going to be sharing my story really from a position of vulnerability. So I just ask that you please allow me the space and the grace to share both the joy and the struggle, the good and the bad, and everything in between. But my hope is that at the end of this conversation, that you leave this meeting with hope and strength. So first, you probably, from my title, I do have a PhD. I'm a scientist. I am a soil biogeochemist. So I know that's a lot of syllables and it's very long, but really it's part biology, part geology, and part chemistry. You might be like me, and when I first heard this was like, wait, those are three totally different fields of science. And this is one of my favorite jokes, like, what's a biogeochemist? 3 grad students in a trench coat? And really what this means is that I know just enough about each of these things to explain why soil is so cool. So this is the side of me that's the scientist, Dr. Claudia Avila. So I do a lot of field work, a lot of lab work. I measure soil, I play with soil. I get to just, figure out why soil is cool. But I wanted to kind of turn from that, like I am a soil biogeochemist, but this is what I do. This is the tool that I use. It's not who I am. And really who I am is somebody that's totally separate from the soil scientist. To my family calls me Cristina. Most of the time, Cristina Cabrona, hard-headed or stubborn. I'm also a mother. I play roller derby. My favorite thing to do is to be joyful, to make people laugh. I'm usually, just being silly with my family. And I have all of these other sides of me that aren't really expressed when I say that I'm a soil biogeochemist. I have done some work in activism. I am a huge nerd. I love Star Wars, and I'm silly. And this is just an expression of who I am that's not listed on paper. So I wanted to kind of give you two definitions before I go into everything. First is, many of you might not even know what a Xingona is. So what is it? So for those of you that don't speak Spanish, usually we use X in the place of CH. So it's Xingona. I just like to use the X instead. Historically, for the masculino form of Xingon, has always meant badass, fearless, powerful. And, if you were to ask somebody from, older generations, what's a Xingona, they would probably think of it as a woman who is too aggressive, uncontrollable, or even a nag. But it was really the Chicano movement and the Latin feminism that has really reclaimed this word. And now I really like this definition of what a Xingona is to aspire, a maker of her own camino. This is her path, and she is going to follow it regardless of what culture says. And this is, people love, saying like, yeah, I'm a Xingona. We see it in art, we see it in music, we see it pretty much everywhere. And other words for it would be, badass, unapologetic, a hustler, and a change maker. And then the other definition I wanted to say, like, what is dirt science? So when I first started learning about soil science, everyone was like, don't say dirt. Like, dirt isn't soil. It's not the same thing. And soil is this living natural entity that is continually developing. So suelo, tierra. And it's really this really dynamic body that has properties that change over time. And we see that soils can be really, really wide ranging, and each of them have benefits and drawbacks. But the implications for soils, why we should care about soils as a society, is we grow our food in soil. Soil acts as a filter for contaminants. Water moves through soil. We build on soil. So you want to make sure you're building on something that can be, sustained. We grow crops that can be used for energy in soil. And also, one of the biggest things, the thing that I study the most is the implications for climate change. So soil actually is the largest terrestrial sink for carbon. And if you're familiar with climate change, carbon, we don't want it in the atmosphere. We want it stored in the soil. So that's why soil is, this very big, beautiful natural body. And dirt, on the other hand, is all that stuff that kind of gets stuck to your shoes. It's that last bit of stuff when you sweep, you can kind of think of it as filth. It's sucio, mugre, basura. And so, a lot of times when I tell people I'm a soil scientist, their immediate response is, oh, you study dirt? And eventually I got so tired of being no, it's so much more than just dirt. I just decided yeah, I study dirt. Let me tell you about it. So I just adopted, I reclaimed dirt science for myself. And now that brings me to who I am. I am a, I call myself a Xingona dirt scientist. And on paper, what like my degrees, I have an associate's degree from Riverside City College. I have a bachelor's and a PhD in environmental sciences from UC Riverside. And I'm currently a postdoc at Stanford. I'm a researcher. I study soils in the larger sense. But how did I actually get into soil sciences? A lot of people ask me this question because it's a very it's not like biology, it's not like geology, like what got you into soil sciences? And this is just an example of how I was introduced formally in schooling is, soil science started with these European men, discovering like the benefits of soils. And these are actual slides taken from my classes, the first, lecture. And they're like, the history of soil science started in 1883 by, Dokuchev, or, the first meeting of the International Soil Science Society was a bunch of white men in a field describing soils. But this was not my, seeing this didn't inspire me to go into soil science. The reality is that I had a different experience with soils, and this started with my family, with my roots. So I was born and raised in the U.S., but I spent a huge part of my life in Zacatecas, where my family's from, which is central part of Mexico, and it's very rural. And I come from farmers. So here's a picture of me and my family. This is, my grandparents' backyard, essentially. That's me there, and that's my mom, my brother, my cousins, and we're just, outside in the dirt, pretty much. And my experience with soil and like how I learned about it was really this, it was my family. So my grandparents here, this is my grandparents' land, they're tending to it. And my, in addition to having, land in Mexico, my grandfather was also a migrant farm worker. He spent 6 months out of the year in California and in other states as a migrant farm worker and laborer, tending to land. So, I really, viewed soil as this history of like, oh, we use soil for growing things. We use, my family, there's a rich history of knowing like, is this good soil or is this bad soil? And just to emphasize, like, soils weren't discovered, like the beauty of soils wasn't discovered, in the late 1800s. We've known the importance of soil. Every society and every culture has had their own words, their own interpretations, their own classification system for soils. And just to give an example for Mexicans, like milpa farming, which is this unique way of growing multiple tiered vegetables that actually have a co-benefit. And this is just a video, very short video of my grandmother just taken a year ago in the milpa, just outside, her home. But like I said, I didn't grow up, in Mexico. I grew up in the U.S. And I grew up with my family is very large. But in the U.S., there's just a few of my aunts and uncles and my mom that came here. And I grew up with my brothers in an urban environment. So I am from Fontana. So if I had to describe Fontana in a few pictures, these are the pictures that I chose. So on the left is, a picture of a street vendor selling elotes. Get your raspados, get your duritos, it's very common to just have, a street vendor, like, just going by your house. This picture here is actually a very recent tagging that made me laugh so much because it's misspelled graffiti of Fontana. And this is another example, I grew up in the hood, and like, this is, my neighbor selling his car. And it made me laugh because it's just, very cool looking car. And this is a picture of me and my mom, taken at the Fontana Indoor Swap Meet, where we would get a lot of things. You could get your glamour shots there. You could get recuerdos for a quinceañera. You can buy your quinceañera dress there. This is where I grew up. So a lot of times, when I meet people, I always like to figure out, like, did you always want to be a scientist? And I found that a lot of people are like, yeah, when I was a kid, I was really into rocks. I collected rocks. My dad was a geologist, and like, they had these like experiences and like people that they knew were scientists. And they're like, yeah, I knew I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to follow in the footsteps of, say, my parents or my grandparents. And if you were to ask, me when I was in the first grade, do you want to be a scientist? I would have been like, what is that? What does a scientist even do? So my answer very flat out would have been absolutely not. Like, I do not want to be a scientist. But there was something about me that was definitely kind of an indication that I was going to be a scientist, is that I was always a really odd kid. So I'll give you an example. I always thought like a scientist, and kids generally have this really unique characteristic when they're learning things, that they think like a scientist. They're problem solvers, they're natural scientists, and they go through this process. Every day. I see my son doing this all the time, where you make an observation, you have a question about that observation, you generate a hypothesis based on what your question was, and then you test that hypothesis. So I was constantly thinking this way. I was constantly, going through this, I was always asking why. Why does that work? Just being this weird kid. An example that I can give of me thinking like a scientist was one day my first grade teacher was teaching us how to memorize our phone numbers. And she was, writing out the format of a phone number, and she was writing out this very specific number. And I was like, my teacher has this phone number memorized. And so I had the question, like, why did she memorize this specific phone number? And my question was like, is this her phone number? So my hypothesis, thinking as a kid, like, hey, that's really odd that my teacher has this very specific phone number memorized. My hypothesis was, if I call this number, my teacher will answer. I assumed, this is my teacher's phone number. So how did I test my hypothesis? Is I called my teacher. And it did end up being her phone number. I can talk a little bit more later, but my teacher, answered the phone and was like, how did you get my phone number? And I was like, oh, well, you showed it, you gave it to us. So I wrote it down and I figured it was your phone number. And those were just, just little quirks about me, that I was always acting like a scientist. I was always asking why. As a kid, school was my safe place. I loved to learn. I loved reading. I loved, just learning everything that I could. And the biggest thing about me is that whenever I would learn something new, I was like, oh man, I have to tell people about this. Like, and I would just, talk about what I would learn, and you can assume that as a kid, for my mom, bless her heart, had to deal with me constantly asking why, and me being like, oh, I learned this today, this is just amazing. And I really love sharing the knowledge. So I really became like kind of a storyteller. So if we zoom past, the awkward years, it's still awkward years in high school, but if you zoom forward, you can imagine how, popular I was, being this weird, quirky kid. In high school, being that odd kid, I was really into the arts. I was in marching band. This is me here in the white. I was the drum major of my marching band. I play the flute. I was in theater. I'm actually not pregnant in high school here. This is just me as the leading lady in a musical. And, I sang. I was in every art that you can think of. And during high school is when people, kids start to think like, oh, am I going to go to college? And, being a first generation, a Chicana, it was always assumed like you have to go to college, you have to get a trade, and you get a job. So for me, in high school, I was like, maybe I want to get a trade, maybe I want to go to college. I really don't know, but I know I'm going to go into some education after high school. But I had an issue, which was my older brother went off to college, and we were very low income, so we didn't have we got all the maximum financial aid for him. But after his first year in college, I remember very distinctly my mom sitting me down and telling me, "Mija, I know I've always told you have to go to college, but if you want to go to college, you're going to have to pay for it on your own. I'm not signing any loans. I'm not doing any of those things because your brother right now, doesn't have enough money for food. I'm barely making it by, raising 4 children alone. If you want to go to college, you're going to have to work for it." So at the time in high school, I was like, oh man, I don't know how I'm going to pay for college. So what I decided, I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to go to community college. It's way cheaper and I can take classes, and maybe I could do a trade, maybe figure out what I really wanted to do. So I decided I'm going to Riverside City College. And the reason I went to Riverside is actually because they had a marching band. I had, the option of going to a trade school. And I really was like, you know what, I'm going to go to RCC. They have a marching band. I can still do my art and, take classes. And at first, the very first, thought was maybe I'll go into cosmetology, get a trade. And then, but there was a huge wait list for that program because it was less expensive than other schools. So while I was waiting, to get into this program, I was like, I really love kids. Maybe I'll go and take classes on early childhood development, maybe, that'll help me in the future when I become a mother. I wanted to take, just a set of classes. And I was required when I, was doing my just general education requirements. I was like, I don't want to take any math, any science. And I was very certain that I didn't want to do that. And my counselor in community college was like, you have to take a basic math and basic science course. And I was like, crap, I don't like those. I've never liked science. I've never liked math. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to get them all done at once. So I decided, okay, I'm going to do my math class and my science class all at once. And when I was in my math and science classes, I realized that I had never been introduced to the subject the way that I was in college. I had very passionate instructors. They taught the way that I learned. So they taught through stories. They taught through examples and things that I could really see for myself. So I, just kind of something just switched in me and was like, you know what, maybe science or, maybe a STEM field is actually something I want to do. And when I was in these classes for early childhood development, I also noticed that all of my classmates were women. And I was like, when I go to my classes for science, there's not enough women in there. There's a lot of guys. And I was like, I think I kind of like being the odd one out. So I kind of just shifted and was like, you know what, I'm really good in science and I'm really good in math. I'm going to do it. And I had this really distinct memory. I was sitting in my car and I was eating my lunch. And I had a thought in my head, and it was, oh, like, what if I become a doctor? And like, I had never thought of that before. It wasn't anything that I had ever aspired to be. And my immediate reaction to that was, oh, you can't be a doctor, maybe a nurse, which is in no way to disrespect the nursing profession at all. It was just, I don't think I can be this top thing. I think I can be the next best thing. And when I had that like thought process, I kind of got like this really like, I got the ick. I got this like kind of guttural reaction. And I was like, why is it that my immediate reaction, it was like, you can't be the best, you have to be second best. And I, kind of just shifted my thinking, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to just go for it. I'm just going to jump in and change like my trajectory pretty much. So essentially, like, I was looking for my passion in community college. I think the time that I spent in community college was just a moment of me looking for my community, looking for my passion. So even though I came for the band, I just started getting involved with programs. My mom, she taught me how to garden as a kid. So I was like, I'm just going to find people that like to garden. And this is a very quick video of me. I think this is in 2012, 10 years ago. We built a garden at my community college.
Hi, my name is Claudia Morin. I'm the president of the Student Sustainability Collective. We are here working on our garden like we do every week. This club is awesome just because we are very involved in the community. We build community character. We do a lot of events during the semester, and the garden is one of our biggest triumphs. So if you're interested in participating this semester, we meet every Thursday, 12:45 to 2 p.m. in.
Yeah. So I just decided, I'm going to find my community. And I found this really, amazing group. They were a group on sustainability and were very environmentally focused. So while I was there, I was like, I'm gonna keep taking science classes, but I'm also really passionate about the environment. I liked gardening. I was like, maybe I'll take like plant biology classes. Like maybe I'll just get a feel for what I really like. And it was really in community college was like, I was like, sustainability and science is this really interesting, cross of all the things that I'm super passionate about. So I kind of just community college was the moment that it just tipped me into environmental sciences. But as I moved from community college and I moved forward, I ended up transferring to UC Riverside to get my bachelor's. I ended up staying at UC Riverside. I was from Fontana, so I didn't want to be far from my family. I wanted to be close by. My mom is very dependent on me. I'm the only daughter, so I have that kind of like elder, only daughter or eldest daughter syndrome where you're taking care of your family. So I just, I stayed in Riverside for my bachelor's and for my PhD. But as I moved through this, hierarchy of my career, I found myself with this kind of predicament where I was often, as I moved through this system, from high school, to community college, then to a 4-year, to graduate school, and now as a postdoc, I found that most of the time I was either the first, the only, or part of the few of people that looked like me and people that had experiences like mine. So just as an example, once I started grad school and even as a postdoc, like there have been situations where I'm often mistaken as an administrative staff member or even a janitor. Like many times people have asked me like, hey, can you open up the broom closet? Like there's a spill. It's like, I don't have the keys for that. My first week at Stanford, I was going to a postdoc orientation, and somebody, like I was, there was a room, people, like there are people waiting outside of a room, and I, walk up, I'm like, ready for my postdoc orientation, and a guy asked me like, aren't you going to open the door? And I was like, what? And he's like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, I thought you were like the administrator, like here to open the door. And I was like, wow, like I'm a postdoc. I belong here in this space. I'm not like, it's not to say that that's less than, but it was like immediately people assume that I'm not in the position that I am. And another thing that I found as I moved through this, like, this hierarchy is, or like through this ladder pretty much, is that my view of environmental science was very different what other people's, view of what the outdoors, what outdoors means. When I was, starting graduate school, everyone that I was with, they were mostly white men. And, they spent their time rock climbing, going on hikes, doing all of these like really, really, backpacking, all of those kinds of things. And I was like, hey, I don't do that. Like, what makes me, like, what is my view of the outdoors? And for me, like outdoor space and like access to spaces was very limited, in that my outdoors was my backyard or in Mexico. And those were my places that I, experienced the environment. We didn't go hiking, just to hike. It was like, we're going to feed the cows. We're going to, check on the well. Like we did this kind of different type of labor in the outdoors. And another, like, my view of the outdoors was different than everyone that I, work with. And, as I'm like processing these like different perspectives, I found myself, and I continue to find myself in this, experiencing imposter syndrome. So for those of you that aren't familiar, imposter syndrome is like, I don't belong here. I'm actually just faking it till I make it. Somebody's going to figure out that I'm actually not supposed to be here. I'm not, smart enough to be here. And like my imposter syndrome has really been like this really weird dynamic where on one hand, I might not be, my triumphs and my accolades aren't viewed the same. So here on the left is like, everyone else that's a postdoc is listed as doctor except for me, and on the other hand, there's like the poster child for diversity. It's like, oh, we have, one brown woman, and like, there's, I'm constantly, being the diversity poster child. And I found that these like different, internal conflicts have been this position that have made me feel really intensely pressured. So if you are familiar with the Encanto Disney film, my son loves it. There's this song that just makes me cry every time I hear it, but it's this really great way of describing this, pressure from, your family's needs and then whatever institution's needs, and you're trying to do it all. And it can be intensely isolating and very internal. And when I was in graduate school, it was, I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't feel like I was smart enough. I always felt like I was the dumbest person in the room. And I remember I was finishing like some requirements to complete my dissertation. And there was just a moment where everything just felt like it was so heavy. And I felt pressure from my family. I felt like I needed to be, ay, mija, like you're doing everything, échale ganas, you're gonna be the doctor. And it was like, oh, but wait, maybe I'm not smart enough. And I had like, the institution was really like telling me like, you're really not smart enough for this. And I would be lying if I said that, holding these two sides hasn't been heavy. And I would be lying if I said that this system hasn't broken me, because it truly has broken me more than once. But when I reflect on those moments that I have felt my lowest and I've felt, dumb, I've, stepped back and looked at myself inwardly, and I think of who I am, what values I have, what joy I have, and what I bring. My family calls me Cristina Cabrona, and I'm stubborn. And I started to realize that I was internalizing things that were external issues. I was accepting that I wasn't enough. But in reality, it was that the system wasn't made for me. And, I decided to, what, I'm going to be myself in this space. I'm going to reclaim my space in this institution. And really what anchored me was when I became a mother. I wanted to have a child, and I became a mother my last year of graduate school. And it was the best way for me to have this anchor, my identity. And I started to refocus my life instead of what's going to make me, a good daughter, I started to think of what's going to make me a good ancestor. What is going to make my legacy, beneficial for my child? So I started to shift my focus. Instead of having a deficit mindset, I started to rethink my life in an asset-based mindset. So a deficit-based mindset is, what is wrong with me? What is missing? What is lacking? And, when growing up, I was poor. Like, my mom did this on her own. My parents were immigrants. My dad was in prison for the majority of my life, and he was deported. I, was a first generation everything. So looking at my life in this format made me feel very low. And then when I started to look at it as an asset, said, okay, what is the strength or the opportunity with these, given variables? And I realized that, being poor also makes you super innovative. It makes you creative. It makes you efficient. I didn't have my dad, but I also had a really beautiful, encouraging, and extended community. I had my family. I have a big family. I leaned on them, and they fulfilled these parts of me that I needed. I am bilingual. I speak Spanish. I have a very proud heritage. And most importantly is that I am hardworking. And all of these things really made me realize that I have so much to offer. And so this brings me to this idea of having a different form of wealth, which I do have, which was described by Chicana scholar Dr. Tara Yasso, which is this idea of community cultural wealth. So even though you might not have wealth in the sense of like dollars and cents, you have this other type of capital that you can use as you navigate through new spaces. So I'm just going to go briefly through each of these. So an aspirational capital. I'm a dreamer. I have lots of hopes, but I'm also very resilient, and my family is very resilient. I have linguistic capital. I speak 2 languages. I have different style of language. I learned stories and cuentos. I have dichos from my family that I carry with me. When I was a kid, I was always, scheduling doctor's appointments for my mom. I was doing taxes as a kid for my mom. Things that I learned along my life that I learned because I had to. I have this huge family capital, which is, your community's history, how you care for others, how you cope in times of stress, and then also just how you provide for others, how, you give your child their not formal education. I also have resistant capital, which is this, genuine opposition to inequality. I value myself as a person. I, look to myself as being self-reliant. I depend on no one. And I also have this huge network of people. I have social capital. I have community resources, people that I can look out for, that can help me. And then lastly, I have this navigational capital, which means I know how to navigate systems that were not built for me. So I want to end this with just these kind of takeaways, is how to be a Xingona. So the first thing is to have this idea of occupying space, where whatever institution you're in is occupy that space, but also make room for others. So this idea is, it's not just my right to be here, I have a responsibility to be here. Ask yourself, how do I make this better for everyone? How do I make sure that voices are amplified that need that amplification? And then look towards yourself and think of, what are my values? What inspires me? And really, you want to think of joy as your biggest act of resistance. What is going to bring me joy? There's so many ideas with just looking at the beauty, looking at the assets of your community will really bring out that joy. And another thing that I want to emphasize is, representation in spaces is one very minor detail. And I really like this quote, representation is the floor, not the ceiling. Meaning that just because there are people that look like you in this space are there, it doesn't mean that you are now welcome. You have to make sure that that space is, making sure representation is there, but also that it's fluid. It can be changed, and we can really reflect what the actual values of all people are. And another is, a lot of times as a Latina, I'm usually the first or the only, but also remembering that you might be the first and the only, but you're not going to be the last. So what is the legacy that you are going to be leaving the space that you're in? And lastly, the one that I think is the most important is to find, and if you can't find your community, build that community. Find those people that have like values with you and really connect with them. How can I help you? How can I be a service to you? For me, it has been science. I want to use science as a tool. And I'm going to find the communities that need that science. And, part of it is, within my own community. But, how can you be, responsible in a community instead of being an individual? And that's all of my presentation. So I want to thank you all so much. Thanks to Jeanette, Melissa, and Mike for giving me this wonderful opportunity. I never get to talk about all this ever. So this is very unique opportunity for me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Avila. I am so happy you were able to share, and I appreciate being vulnerable and really going deep into your story. What a great conversation we had. I'm gonna see if there's any questions on the chat. If anybody wants to ask you something, or it looks like there's a lot of positive comments coming through. Are you able to see them?
No.
No. So you have, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you. Amazing talk. Thank you for sharing. Thank you so much for your time and vulnerability. So inspiring, really inspirational. You are amazing. You are changing the world. So proud of all that you've done. Powerful. Thank you so much. And thank you for being a Xingona and inspiring. So yes, I think it was definitely a very inspiring story and, you know, a very proud moment for a Xingona. So if no one else has questions, we did record the session and, you know, it will be available for everybody. And thank you so much. I love wrapping up our Vamos Unidos Hispanic Heritage Month events with this powerful story. So thank you all for joining. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Gracias.
doctora.
Thank you.
We love you, Claudia.
Thank you, Sam.
Gracias.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claudia.